We are going to conclude small blind SRP now by talking about betting the river and getting check raised. I want to open up with talking about kind of the same way that we started talking about the turn, but basically it comes down to this. Generally speaking, when you get check raised on the river, traditionally that the size that your opponent risks is going to be a size where you only have to continue with about 55 to 60% of your range. And additionally, what makes the river interesting compared to the flop or the turn is that when your opponent does decide to bluff, they always have non-equity. Now, on the river, it's a lot more important to deny non-equity because that's what all the bluffs are going to be. Whereas on the flop and turn, a lot of the times when they do check raise you, they're going to have equity in the pot to improve. And so you're going to have to continue a little bit more on the flop and turn relative to the river. But the river, you can do a much more direct, just call the amount of the time that you need to deny those bluffs. So the way we're going to look at it on the river, we bet and they check raise. We're going to break down what the minimum hand to value bet that we would use would be. And then we're going to talk about what our bluffs would look like. And we're going to decide what percentage of our range we're going to have to continue, generally speaking, versus a standard-ish range, standard-ish sized raise. We're going to be folding all of our bluffs, which will be about 20, 25, 30% of our hands. And then we are going to continue with about half to 2/3 of our value bets. So again, sort of like with the turn, our thinnest value bets will be bet folds as a general rule. Now, I think thinnest is probably the wrong term. The actual correct term would be the hands with the best removal. Because when you get check raised on the river and you have a value bet, if you can beat some of their value hands, you have a very clear call because you will win against the bluffs, but then also some of their value bets. But when you have a hand that can't beat any of their value, all of those hands essentially are the same value. Whether you have two pair or top pair, if your opponent says, hey, I have a flush, those hands have the same relative value. So rather than look at things in just terms of like two pair or top pair, we're going to look at things in terms of their removal and how to build a correct range of hands to call. Okay, so we're going to start off here with King Queen, open it up, standard 3 streets here. Okay, so let's kick it off with talking about what percentage, let's do this. All right, so we face check raise at 9,200, and they're risking 9,200, 9,182, divided by 7,500. Okay, so we can fold about 52% of our hands here and be okay. So let's start off with the 25-ish% of our hands that are going to be bluffing. It's going to be hands like 4-3, 6-4, 6-3, maybe a hand like Jack-9, backdoor flush draw. Those are going to be our primary bet 3 type of holdings. We're not really going to have hands like Queen-Jack. I think that's generally going to check back and look to delay C-bet. So our primary bluffs are going to be those low straight draws. In general, I would try to give up the lower flush draws on boards like this because we have straight draws to choose from. And the straight draws are generally speaking going to be much more efficient bluffs. They're not going to block a lot of those heart hands that are going to be calling on the flop and turn that then would fold river. So we're going to have to fold about, we're going to subtract 0.2. Actually, doesn't really work like that. We're going to just move that to the side. Okay, so we're going to have to call here with about 2/3 of our value bets. Now, let's start off with what are our weakest value bets. So I'm going to be betting King Queen 3 streets, King Jack 3 streets, King 9 is close. I don't really mind either way with King 9. I think both decisions can be reasonable. So let's just say that our weakest value bet is going to be King Jack. Now, we're not going to have too many hands better than single pair hands here because there's no straights on the board, no flushes. So we're going to have King 5, King 2, King 10, 2-2, 5-5. All those hands certainly reasonable. It's definitely better to bet call a hand like King Queen or King Jack than aces. Aces tends to be a kind of bad bet call in this situation because you don't block any of the two pair. Really, our opponent is saying something along the lines of he has either King 8, 8-5, or some kind of slow played hand from the flop or turn. So I think one of our first value bets we would want to look to fold is aces. King, queen, king, jack, of course, both blocking 2 pairs. So we're going to fold aces, and then after that, all of the kings have the same value: ace, king, king, queen, king, jack. So ideally, we want to call with kings that don't block our opponent's bluffs, because we can only fold about a third of our value bets. So I think folding hands that are king X with a heart makes a lot of sense. If you have king jack with a jack of hearts, king queen with the queen of hearts, ace king with the ace of hearts, those are all very good bet folds, because you want him to have a hand like ace 2 with the ace of hearts, or ace 2 of hearts rather, when he does decide to check raise bluff. You could probably get away with folding a few more kings than that. So I think king queen is very close either way. If you want to pick out some folds where a lot of hands have similar strength, I recommend going in a linear fashion. So we've deduced that we don't want to have a heart, right? And we're going to obviously bet call 2 pairs and sets, but we don't have a lot of those hands. So we're going to bet fold aces. We're going to bet fold king X where we have the kicker as a heart. That's not going to be about a third of our value bet. It's probably going to be closer to like 15 or 20%. So once you've gone through and gotten rid of those hands that have significant removal, the next step would be to go in a linear fashion. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about on the turn, where when there are significant blockers, we use those, but then next after that, we go in a linear sense. So once we've gotten rid of the aces, the king jack, the king queen, the ace king with a heart, now we're going to get rid of king jack, which is our lowest hand in just a linear value. And I think somewhere on king queen without a kicker that's a heart is where our call range should be. So this is a very close hand either way. I could see merit for both options. Maybe fold this, call ace king. But you're right in the wheelhouse with this hand between both decisions. And yeah, 2 pair. Okay. All right. Moving on. And I put in a mix here of hands we won, hands we lost, hands that were interesting. I have about 4 or 5 more hands to discuss and go through. Okay, so ace 9, open it up. Worth noting, we have a slightly larger preflop size. Their range will be slightly tighter. Clear value bet. Bet the river and face a check raise. All right, so this is a spot, the flush spot specifically. Let's start off with what they're risking. So it's 11 divided by... All right, so we can fold about 66% of our range here on the river, which means we can obviously fold our 25-30% of hands that are bluffs. And then of our value bets, we can actually fold around half of them and still be totally okay. Maybe even slightly more than half of them and be fine. So let's start off with what is our worst value bet that we would bet here. Well, we're not going to be betting single pair hands. Definitely not going to be betting hands like ace king. But all of the 2 pair hands I think are pretty reasonable still. Particularly, like, even if you look at a hand like Jack 3 compared to a hand like Ace King, Jack 3 doesn't block the Ace X hands that you want them to call down with, whereas Ace King does block that, so they're more likely to have a hand like 2 pair or a draw. So I would say 2 pair is probably right around the bottom of our range of hands we'd want to be betting for value. But Jack 3 not traditionally going to be an open, and at this sized open, almost certainly not going to be an open. So realistically, we're looking at something along the lines of ace 3 being our lowest value bet. Yeah, ace 3. So we have ace 3. Probably not going to play ace 7 as bet. Ace 3, ace 9, ace jack. And then 3-3, jack, 10-8, particularly 10-8 with a diamond. And also flushes. So on the river, we're going to have, let's just like pull up Equilab really quick. We'll break it down a little bit more specifically. All right, so let's make this smaller. So on this board, let's put it in really quick. These diamonds, jack clubs, 3 of diamonds, turn 9 of hearts, river 7 of diamonds. Okay. So let's create the value range first here. We are always going to have ace 3. Always going to have ace jack. Always going to have 3-3. Always going to have jack, jack. Let's say we're going to have 10-8 when we have a diamond. And we'll say we have 10-8 of Oh, shit. 10-8 of diamonds and clubs. Can I do this correctly? The answer is maybe. Okay. So we got 32 of the value bets before we get into the flushes, which seems appropriate. Okay, now let's do this. Obviously not that. Three. Obviously not that either. Okay, king, deuce of diamonds, queen, deuce of diamonds. These are all things that could be. Sorry, obviously going to be quiet while I figure this out. Okay. 9-8 diamonds going to check turn. That's going to check flop. Okay. So we have 60 combos of value, which means we can have something along the lines of 25 combos of bluffs. So what are those bluffs going to be? I think the most natural one is 5-4 with a diamond, assuming that we're opening 5-4. Queen 10 with a diamond for sure. King, probably not going to be betting hands like King Deuce with the King of Diamonds on the turn. Although it could be reasonable to put a couple of those in on the turn. Yeah, maybe that's actually an okay hand. We'll say King 2 of Diamonds. And what else are we going to be bluffing with here? Queen 8 with the diamond. I don't really think we're going to have hands like 4-2 with a diamond. And that's not really going to almost ever be an open, or 5-2 with a diamond. So after that, we might have to actually select. We can have a hand like 8-7 with a diamond. So let's say that. It's not going to be that many hands. And now we have a pretty balanced over bet range. 84 combos, 24 combos of bluffs. This is probably right around what your range should look like. So we can fold 65%, going back over here. And then we're going to multiply that by the amount of combos, 84. So we can fold 55 combos. 84 minus 55. 29 combos have to continue. So we're going to start off with folding all of the bluffs. Those are clear folds. Then we're going to fold 2 pairs. So take those out immediately. Actually, let's take this out. We might be able to call only flushes and be fine. Yeah, look at that. You only have to call flushes here. 29 combos. We have 29 combos of flushes. So, yeah. You actually don't have to call anything. I wasn't totally sure if we would have to call maybe ace-jack with the jack of diamonds. I think that would be the next up-handed bet call. The jack of diamonds also actually a very relevant card because jack X of diamonds is certainly a hand that we'll have to call 2 streets. So maybe you could make the argument that ace-jack should be a call over a couple of these hands. What do you think? Is the jack of diamonds more relevant than a hand like 4-2 of diamonds? Well, 4-2 of diamonds I think is actually still quite relevant because king X of diamonds, queen X of diamonds, jack X of diamonds, those can all have a deuce in them. Yeah. I mean, it's close. You can either pick ace-jack or maybe a couple of these suited hands. But the point is, your call range would look something along the lines of this. So this is how you have to do it when you face check raise. To be honest with you, I actually think that this is one of the easier situations to deal with when you face a check raise because you can just plug and play. You just put in your combos, figure out how many combos have to continue, and it's kind of hard to make a mistake, especially if you just go through after and learn what you did or didn't do wrong. Yeah. Now, if your opponent uses a hand like the king of diamonds or the queen of diamonds in their bluff check raise range, it's obviously going to take a good portion of these out on the bet call. And because of the removal standpoint, if you wanted to widen slightly, maybe use a couple extra calls, like maybe a hand like 10-8 diamonds. To be honest with you, 10-8 diamonds is probably a good call as well. That's fine, because if you do the exact amount of combos and your opponent bluffs with a card that has significant removal, it might make you call less often. But the counter to that is because your bluffs are picking out cards that also emphasize that type of removal. Their blockers actually block both the bluffs and the value bets, so it shouldn't be as dramatic of an effect as it might be otherwise. But at the same time, two diamonds will have more blockers than one. So, yeah, okay, cool. I think that's a good example. All right, let's move on. Okay, open up Jack 7. Bet, call, bet, call, bet, raise. Okay, so we're going to kick it off in the same way, always going back to the same thing here. What are our odds our opponent is risking? 5-5-1-2 to win 9-1-9-0. So we can fold about 60% of our range here and be okay. Again, guys, like on the river raises, they really just don't get good odds. Okay, so our river bet range, we're going to have some bluffs. We're going to have some straight draws for sure, like queen 9, 10, 9, and maybe even a few club hands, because otherwise we're just not going to bluff enough. And then after that, we have Jack X or stronger. We're not going to be betting a hand like a king. We're not going to have a hand like an ace that goes bet. So we're basically saying we have queen 10, which is obviously going to be a bet call because you even beat some of his value. And then queen jack, jack 10 are going to be bet calls as well because, again, those hands can beat... Sorry, what am I talking about? Those hands the kicker doesn't play. So he's not going to be check raising a jack here. He's basically saying he has queen 10 or a boat. So all the jacks are the same value. Queen 10 is going to be a bet call because it beats, or it chops rather, with other queen 10s. And then after that, the question becomes, how many jack X's do we call? Well, so we can fold about 60% of our hands, and about 25% are going to be bluffs. So we can fold probably around a third of our value bets, maybe a little bit more, like two-fifths of our value bets. And the question becomes, what hands make the most sense? Well, you don't want to have clubs, because a hand that could potentially be bluffing here is a hand like 6x of clubs, or maybe even ace x of clubs, although that probably is going to call the river. So realistically, you don't want to have a club, although the removal isn't that significant. It really isn't, because if you have a club, he's not really check calling too many club hands on the turn that would want to bluff the river, and if he is bluffing, he's most likely going to bluff with a hand like king 6. So this could be a situation where you want to look at your range almost entirely linearly, in a linear sense, and just bet call your better jacks, bet fold your worst ones. In which case, this could be a fine hand to... I think this is close. I think somewhere around jack 7, jack 8, you have to bet call. And not having a club probably is better than having a club, even though they're probably very similar in value. So if you want to bet call jacks out of club, and maybe bet fold a few of your worst jacks, that could be fine. So like bet fold, jack 2, jack 3, jack 4, jack 5, and then also bet fold jack X when the X is a club. I think that's a reasonable play. Queen jack, jack 10 are going to be much better bet calls because you also block you also block queen 10. So those are certainly bet calls, but queen 10 bet calls, and then the middling jacks have to basically decide how often they call. And that's why I picked this hand as a bet call. I think this is very close, though. I don't really could go either way. I want us to get down to this process, though. What percentage do I have to call? All right. What hand should I pick? All right, queen jack, generally splitting it here on the flop between both betting and checking. I like to bet this one. Now on this turn of a very clear 3-barrel bluff, going to have jack 9, going to have 9-6, going to have a bunch of other better hands as well. Oh, shit, God damn it. Pretend you didn't see that. Okay, bet the turn here as well. River queen, go for some value, and get a check raise. Okay. So on the river, our opponent is essentially saying that they have a flush. They are risking... I don't know why I keep doing that. I don't have to. Risking 8, 2, 7, 4 to win 14,000. So again, I can fold 59% of my range. I'm going to have bluffs here that I'm going to bet fold. Bluffs that are like 6, 7, especially 6, 7 with a club. A hand I might be bluffing with is a hand like jack 6 with a club. You're going to have to bet some hands without clubs here too, because too many of your hands have paired. So maybe a hand just like 6-5 is actually just going to be a bluff, even though generally speaking I wouldn't want to bluff that in the flush runouts. I don't think I have enough hands that are just club hands to bluff with, which is an important triple barrel just general tactic is to try to pick hands that do have one of the suit that ran out. But on boards where you're kind of unlikely to have many of the suit, you have to pick other bluffs. King 9, although I would generally be checking that on the flop. Maybe this board's actually like kind of hard to have a lot of bluffs because your 7x hands paired, your queen x hands paired, your club hands got there. So you should be very aggressive in choosing out the bluffs that you do have on this river because you're not going to have a lot on this run out. But the question now becomes what hand should bet call? And generally speaking, having the 10 of clubs in your hand would be very sweet because 10x of clubs is going to be one of the primary value bets here. Straights without a club are not very good bet calls. So I think you should be bet calling flushes. We're going to okay, actually, let me start off with this. You're going to have to bet call a little more aggressively here than we did in the other hand where we had ace 9. Because in this spot, they're risking less. So we have to bet call more of our range. So I don't think you should be bet calling here without having a club in your hand. And I think straights with a club, flushes, two pair with a relevant club, those are all fine bet calls. The question is, how far into your one pair hands do you have to go? And should Queen Jack be a bet call within that? And I'm not totally sure how relevant the Jack of clubs is. I mean, Jack 10 of clubs, 10-3 of clubs, Jack 9 of clubs, and but see, Jack 9 of clubs might just check raise the turn. And Jack 10 of clubs probably 3 bets pre-flop. So I'm looking at this more, and even though this was an example of a hand that would probably be a good hand to bet call because of removal, I actually think that this should be a bet fold. And I should be trying to use hands more like Queen 10, 10 of clubs, 10, 8, 10, 8, 10 of clubs, 10, 3, 10 of clubs. Those hands make more sense. Straights with a club, flushes. Hands that have a little more relevant of removal than just the top pair with the club here. Although I think straights with the club are probably actually similar in value to Queen Jack with the Jack of clubs. But there's no doubt in my mind that having the ace or king or 10 or 3 of clubs, all of those hands have more relevant removal than the Jack of clubs. And so I think that that actually makes this a pretty reasonable bet fold unless you think your opponent's over bluffing. So yeah, like 9 of clubs was the card he elected to bluff with in the spot. I think 9-8's generally a pretty reasonable hand to bluff with. Is there a way he can have the ace of clubs? I think I would probably use a hand like ace 8, ace of clubs as a bluff here, which is one of the reasons why I would call that hand on the turn. But that's for a little bit of a different analysis, talking about the big one. I think his play is okay. All right, let's look at the next one. Okay, ace queen, open call. Bet call. And this is actually quite an old hand. I would not have nearly as many hands like this bet the flop nowadays. I'd probably be checking, but here we are. Oh yeah, this hand I suck just because I don't like the size that he chose here. I think when you check raise on this one flush spot in the river, you should be going a very small size, like maybe min raise or almost a little bit more than a min raise, and generally be value betting. You should only have like 15% bluffs or so because your opponents are being offered a very good price. But the reason I don't like this size is that on the river when I do bet, I'm basically saying I have either a bluff, like some kind of straight draw that's now bluffing. I actually might turn. You know what I think I would do on this board? This is a cool thing. I think almost every bluff I have has gotten there. So I think I'm going to use I think I'm going to use my worst couple of Jack X hands that were betting for value as bluffs. So I have Jack 10, Jack or Queen Jack, and I bet flop, bet turn, and this is the river. I'm turning those hands into bluffs because I can't really see another way I'm going to have enough hands to bluff with other than just to pick some of my worst value bets and use those as bluffs. And I find a lot of players are too hesitant to do that because a hand was stronger on an earlier street. They just take their showdown and hope they don't have a club. But I think on this board specifically, some of the thinner hands that we're looking to go bet check should just barrel the third time and bluff here. But anyway, I don't really like the size on the river because on the river I'm basically saying I have a king of clubs or the ace of clubs or nothing. And obviously ace of clubs can be raised. And if my range looks like that, and I'm like roughly, I guess maybe this is a little bit more okay the more I think about it, because a couple kings do have to call. If I only continue with ace X, I probably don't have enough hands to call with. But I'd like a size that more targets king X, like makes about half the combos have to either call or fold. And that's a good general, if I had to like give you a good tip about post-flop sizing, in situations that your opponent mainly has one or two kinds of hands, you want to pick sizes that put those hands in a tough spot. A good example of that is on paired boards. You want to pick sizes, particularly on the turn, that make it so that if they have ace high, they don't have a clear fold or a clear call. And if you bet too small or too big, their decision is clear. So by choosing a size more like 45, 50, 55%, you put those ace highs in a really tough spot. And I like the same idea here on the river for a hand like the king of clubs. Because if you bet 3,200 here to win 2,100, I can fold like 60% of my hands. Maybe I can fold almost every king of clubs and be totally okay here. Maybe I can just fold all of them and be okay here because I have so many ace of clubs, particularly back in the day when I was probably betting more of those hands on the flop to begin with. So I'd like to see a size here of more like 2.5, 2.6K. And another spot that this kind of is the same situation is on the paired boards. On the paired boards, you want to use a smaller size. And generally speaking, on the more static spots where removal plays more of a role, you want to pick smaller sizes because otherwise you really don't offer yourself an attractive opportunity to bluff. And obviously, 3-bet fold. Okay. How did this one not get full-sized? All right, ace-king. Open it up, get a call. Again, this has got to be real old, yeah. Not a big fan of this. Betting this hand on small frequency can be fine, but again, you should be checking it. We're going 3. Oh yeah, so I thought this hand was interesting because we get check raise on the river, and I look to jam it. So let's talk about bluffing in this spot. The way I would play this hand nowadays, I would have ace-2 of spades, ace-3 of spades, maybe some ace-5 of spades, but generally speaking, I would have ace-2 and ace-3, and that's kind of it. So because we only have 2-ish combos of value, you have to use, he's not getting that great of odds in this call, but you have to use, half a combo of bluffs. And you're going to have 3 combos of ace-king with the ace of spades. Again, maybe I was bluffing. Maybe I was betting more nut flushers on the flop at the time. At some point, it gets hard to remember. But in situations where you only have a couple of combos, you have to be unbelievably selective here. And this is the hand I would use. If you have a hand like ace-jack, you should bet call because you block enough value and have showdown. And if you have ace-7, ace-8, ace-7, ace-4, you're not going to have any of those hands. Because ace-8, if ace-8 does bet flop and turn, it's checking the river. You're taking a showdown. If it does bet flop, it's probably checking the turn. So you're not going to have ace-8, you're not going to have ace-4, you're not going to have those hands. So this is the correct hand to jam. It's the best hand that we can have with the ace of spades that cannot bet call. We don't beat some of the bluffs. If he's bluffing, he has a hand like a pair plus flush draw blocker. So this is certainly the correct hand to use, but you have to be unbelievably careful. I mean, you should be doing this like something along the lines of like 10, 15, 20% of the time. Also worth mentioning, if he has a hand like king 3 of spades, you have 1 combo of value. So yeah, have this in your arsenal. And especially online, it's easier because you can be more selective with using a randomizer to get a really low percentage. But just make sure you're doing this like a real tiny amount. I would almost just bet you I was over bluffing back in the day. I think I was going through a little bit of a phase where I was like, oh man, they can't have the nuts. It's important to work these moves in, but just the right frequency given the odds your opponent gets on their call. Okay. All right, so here we have a cool hand. Bet flop, bet turn, bet river, and get raised. And generally speaking, on these paired boards, these are almost always the correct hand to use to bluff with. You block 6-6, 9-9, although 9-9 is probably going to praise. It's not really that relevant. But you block 6-6, you block 9-9, you block 9-2, you block 6-2. I mean, 6-2 suited isn't even a hand you can have because there's 2 deuces out there, 2 sixes, you block all of them. So you should definitely be jamming this hand. Some frequency facing this raise. We start off with our value range, which is going to be 3 combos of kings, 3 combos of nines, 3 combos of sixes. Do we feel safe jamming king deuce? What calls us? I don't think I would jam 6 deuce. Or sorry, king deuce. Because you block a deuce, and really one of the best hands from the bet call or raise and then might call you off is ace deuce. So we have something along the lines of 9 combos of value. Obviously, we also have deuces, but for you to get paid, I mean, yeah, we'll call it 9 combos of value. So when we jam, we risk 27,000 to win a pot of 12,000. So our opponent, actually, no. What's his call? So he needs to call 30. So all right. So we have 37% bluffs. So we have 9 combos of value. We can have around 3 combos of bluffs. Undoubtedly, it should be 9-6, because if we have just a 9, we're going to bet fold. Is that true? Can we really bet fold all of our 9s? We probably cannot. We only have a few kings. King X of spades. We could have 9 deuce, but we're not opening the offsuit version of that. 6 deuce, not opening the offsuit version of that. Maybe 9-6 should be a bet call, now that I'm thinking about it. Actually, you know what it should be? It should be like this. Some portion of 9-6 should bet jam, and the remaining combos should bet call. And the amount of combos that should bet jam here is about a third of them, because you have 9 combos of 9-6. So 1 out of 3 of them should bet jam, and the rest should be bet calling. Now, it might be better to not have the 6 of spades, because 6x of spades is a reasonable hand for me to be bluff check raising with. Particularly a hand like ace-6 or queen-6 of spades. Those could be very reasonable check raise bluffs. So maybe you want to bet jam with something about like half the time when you don't have the 6 of spades, something in that vicinity. But we always start with the value, establish the bluff, and then we have our overall range. And additionally, on the paired boards, generally speaking, the hand that blocks both boats without having trips, that's usually going to be your bet jam. On some boards, if it's like a flush or a straight board, it could be trips. Some of your trips you cannot bet call. The best hand, your best trips that you cannot bet call would be my hand I would select to bluff with. But a good general rule is just take your most counterfeited 2 pair that you would bet for value, and that's traditionally going to be your bet jam as a bluff. Okay, that's going to bring us to the conclusion here. I actually think that you guys are going to have a pretty easy time facing river check raise. If you just like bet your range correctly on the flop and turn and river, it plays pretty simple. You fold your bluffs, you look at how much more your value you have to call, and you just call accordingly. So on that note, we are going to go ahead and move into big blind SRP and start talking about how to play post flop in the big blind in single raise spots.